Lech apparently got involved in Twitter last night and made a really interesting point, which if there was any intellectual integrity to the karaoke brigade that is covering the, I'm trying to use their language specifically, the authoritarian measures by colleges that are akin to the authoritarian measures that we saw following 9/11. If there was any integrity there, which is, and let's be clear what their argument is. Their argument is that there is an overreaction to COVID on these campuses
by college bureaucrats.
By college bureaucrats. They, of course, are speaking for the voiceless college students who, I mean, by all accounts, the majority of the students on these campuses and the majority of the parents who are sending them, in many instances paying or taking out loans, or majority of the people associated with the campus, all want these restrictions to the extent that they feel that COVID is a problem.
The majority of the ones that subjected themselves to Michael Tracey's karaoke time.
Exactly.
Right. And interesting, by the way, that they focus on college campuses and not, say, corporations, for example.
But let's just assume for a moment that their premise is correct, that COVID is not such a big deal that you can take these draconian measures. Where else might you find another such target? Where else might you find this dynamic where the specter of COVID, instead of being dealt with rationally, is authoritarian and excessive and draconian,
being used in an opportunistic way by reactionary forces?
Yes. Where else might you find that? Well, Matt on Twitter pointed that out to the karaoke brigade.
Yeah, so Tracey was upset that we covered his little college stunt. Sure. And Michael says, if I think if anyone's creepily infatuated, it's these weirdo YouTube pundits who choose to spend their time constantly gossiping about me. Now, we did a little bit of talking about the girlfriend that Glenn and Tracey always bring up.
Yeah.
But that wasn't really the thrust of the topic.
Who we wouldn't have brought up in any derisive way if Glenn hadn't, for some reason, brought it up himself.
But we can call a truce on that.
Yeah. Right. And let's be clear here. Michael Tracey is just an example. He is an avatar of a certain attitude on I don't know where to put them politically necessarily. The self-styled anti-authoritarians who find authoritarianism in only very convenient places for them. And
almost like they have blinders on.
It's almost as if they can only see it in one silo. But yet their whole brand is, I don't have a party. I am a journalist. Thus my microphone and my amplifier. I am a journalist. And so I don't pick sides. I report the truth. So I don't have blinders. If I see this authoritarian and draconian response to COVID, I'm going to talk.
I don't care whose toes I step on.
It doesn't matter. Do I need to be an expert on higher education or health matters to comment on a response by a college? I do not.
Do I need to be even really covering Title 42 to understand the bullshit justification using COVID safety that's it's being used to? Do I need to be covering it to even comment on it?
Well, maybe.
Here's
exactly. Here is Matt challenging the karaoke brigade.
Yeah, so Zaid basically quote tweets Michael saying, another in the genre of colleges are just full of kids who don't criticize anything new, blah, 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 yeah. And then I quote tweet them. I was glad for the engagement. Hi, Zaid and Michael. Since you're both so sincere about covering the state use of COVID to attack human rights beat, I'm curious when you Tucker guests will get around to condemning the faux COVID safety justification for Title II expulsions. How does Tucker feel? And then you can
Title
start
42.
Yeah.
Now, just to be clear, Title 42 was a Trump-initiated provision that said, instead of processing immigrants under the auspices of the COVID emergency, and I think these guys would certainly say, like, this is not March 2020. Under the auspices of the COVID emergency, we don't need to follow any procedures in deporting them. We can just grab them, put them on a plane. Doesn't matter if they have a claim to asylum or to temporary protected status. We just get rid of them. That is an abuse of Title 42, particularly if you are sensitive to this dynamic, one would imagine. Matt posed it to him. Let's show their reply to Matt's questioning, like, why haven't you spoken up about this? This has nothing to do with Tucker Carlson necessarily, although it is a good example of, it's hard to, these guys don't believe in labels.
Hey, I would use if I could get on Tucker Carlson's show and advocate for the taking down of Title 42 and admission of Haitians, I would do it personally.
But let's be fair. Please show their response, because this is low-hanging fruit. This is a gimme, because all you got to say is
that's bad too.
That's bad too.
Yeah, and I'll get around to it.
Michael says, I don't know or care how Tucker feels. That's weird, because I think we all know and some of us care how Tucker feels about that issue. I've been covering a different issue entirely, and your little crew's response was to launch yet another YouTube gossip session that had nothing to do with what I've actually written said. Happy to discuss it on air, creep.
Well, we're not discussing whatever he's doing with his girlfriend or whatever it is.
Or how delightful
I'm asking a direct question about when he's going to condemn the Title 42.
Yes, like where is the intellectual integrity, the journalistic integrity, the integrity of your principle that we are overreacting as a society to COVID? When it comes to the idea that COVID is justifying the complete abridgment of our statutory protections that we allow for refugees and immigrants.
And not a reaction that is very well documented as not legal when we were looking at both international law and United States law. So law is not always a useful way to look at some of these things, but for their purposes, it could not be more clear cut. We are supposed to have an asylum process in this country, and the usage of Title 42 infringes upon that process. And so you want to talk about authoritarianism.
It totally obliterates
it. Yeah.
And let's be clear. There's no question that a private college has the legal right to impose restrictions.
Is Connecticut College violating international law?
Yeah, I mean, it's not even abridging its own policies.
Are Michael and Zaid and everybody who's in favor of this or against it, or covering this as their beat, are they in favor of abolishing private colleges and funding public universities so that maybe they can have a say in their elected officials making authoritarian or not decisions over college students? I don't know. Something to float to them.
I just think the direct question should be easy, and I think it's revelatory that they can't answer this question. Now, I would imagine now that they are, called on it, that they may very well do, because this is a game of hide the ball for them, right? Like, there is only one major problem in this country, and when it comes to COVID overreaction, that is schools. Because let's be clear, he's also moved on to other institutions. And to ignore the summary expulsion of thousands of people to a country that has been clearly ravaged by disaster, political and disasters that are at least, we have hurricane and floods and earthquake. to ignore that, particularly like maybe it's not their responsibility to be just sort of like randomly doing it, but the question's been asked, should be like, oh, I have no opinion on it. It hasn't even occurred to me.
Also, it's not
I'm
what
covering
he's
something else entirely. So how would I even ever comment on
Right,
that?
that's the point is, I mean, if he's only narrowly covering one particular beat, it's not like he has an editor that says you're only allowed to cover, I don't know, energy policy. He's of Substack. He can cover whatever he wants, and so he can make a determination on what's proportionally more of a government overreach. Is it Title 42 or is it the private policies of private colleges?
Why might one in that position be afraid to defend the right of Haitian immigrants, let's say, to have a fair hearing as to whether they are
a public health risk
temporary protected status is warranted? Why might one be afraid to do that on Twitter?
Yeah.
Which, incidentally, was a very good piece that showed that in terms of growing your Substack, Twitter is really the only way to do it. And so if you're on Twitter and your Substack relies on a certain audience that has a certain perspective about things,
Certain feeling about Haitian immigrants.
you might be reluctant, even if it's a nuanced position. Even if you had to say, I, of course, have mixed feelings about the idea of allowing more Haitian immigrants into the
that's
country.
problematic.
There is, this is an example of COVID overreach. You might be afraid that, like, well, I want to make it clear. Look at my first qualification. I have questions about Haitian immigrants coming in.
I mean, well, that's because what I call the Tucker guests, what they do is lie by emphasis to support a right-wing agenda, basically. And so Zaid himself and a few of the other guys would retweet the images of the people under the bridge saying, like, the cruelty is the point, and that's sort of the Biden hypocrisy point. Not saying we should be processing these people to let them in, because guess what? All of their audience would hate that.
Yes.
Look at the people who comment and quote tweet on those tweets saying, what do we owe these people? Why didn't they follow the laws? Why don't they respect our laws? That's the audience these people are cultivating. So none of these people, and I would love all the Substack crew to get together and all come up with their own individual numbers of how many Haitian immigrants you want. Combine that, and then we'll see what the total number is between all of you guys.
Be fascinating.
Says happy to discuss on air. Maybe we can pin him down on that. I don't know.
I think Binder's
my experience with Michael Tracey is that he will say he's happy to discuss something on air, but when he does come on air, he will not answer those questions. It took me 15 minutes, I think, when I had him on about some squealing he was about the Russiagate to finally tire of asking him the same question that he refused to answer.
I wanted you to apologize because you had Marcy Wheeler on.
And I specifically asked Glenn Greenwald when I had Glenn Greenwald on, should I apologize about Marcy Wheeler? And he said explicitly, no.
Oh, and speaking of China, by the way, I just have to get this out there about the Russiagators. The deal between the United States and Australia and the UK to ramp up tensions in the region of China in order to increase our presence and pivot to Asia is much more of a Cold War threat than anything that came out of the clumsy political rhetoric of the Russiagators. I'm curious to see, I know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is on the floor, House floor, talking about China, and I know that Tucker Carlson himself is quite concerned about China, definitely not motivated by racism in any way. If any of these folks, Greenwald, Jelani, Tracey,
they're off that beat now.
Yeah, but like the point is that Russiagate was always an opportunity to talk about liberal hypocrisy outside of everything else. It's the same thing when they, talk about, oh, look at Biden and the way he's responded to immigration. Do they favor a more humane immigration policy? Are they against Title 42? Of course not. It's just useful in order to own the libs. It was the same thing with Russiagate. If they were seriously concerned about some sort of Cold War ramp up, they would be talking at length about the United States' new foreign policy stance towards China. I haven't heard much of that.
No. It is sort of surprising. They're off that beat now. They're off the atomic clock beat. Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really. Thank you.